Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So for our screencast today, we're going to focus on a specific style of note-taking called Cornell note-taking style. So I'm not going to mandate that you guys use this particular style of taking notes, but I'm going to strongly suggest it. I think that it's helpful simply because it really kind of breaks down how you organize your notes, and I think that that could be helpful for helping you to understand the material. And then it also kind of gives you some small tasks to do after class, which I think are instrumental in helping you to actually retain the information and really get a good understanding of the information. So what I'm going to do with the screencast today, this is really kind of a skills-based screencast. I'm going to take you through how to take notes, taking Cornell note-taking style. And this is very important just in general. Even if you decide not to use the Cornell note-taking style, I think that this is going to be kind of an important screencast to figure out, like, what do I write down? How should I be taking notes? Because I think that's a big skill that a lot of students don't have and they need to have. So let's kind of take a look. Let's just start with kind of a basic question. I want you guys to think about this. What percentage of information from a lesson do you think you remember the next day? You personally, and then the average student. So I want you to think about it. Maybe write down what you think. What percentage of information do you think you remember from a lesson the next day? Now, the answers may shock you. So they did a study. This is why it's called the Cornell note-taking style. They did a study at Cornell. At this point, it's years ago. But they, were taking a survey of Cornell college students. And these statistics might shock you a little bit. The next day, after a lecture or after a lesson, students only remembered, or they had forgotten 62% of the material in one day. In 20 minutes, they had forgotten 47% of the material. So think about that. The next day, you've already forgotten over half of the material talked about in class. So that should kind of give you a clue as to how important notes are. Notes are really not for the moment. They're not for you understanding. It helps you to understand it in the moment, it does, but it's really for later on, because you are going to forget a lot of the things that were discussed, a lot of the things that were talked about, unless you take good, solid notes. So think about it as helping your future self as much as it is helping you during class itself. There are also proven studies that show that if you write material down and if you handwrite it, you better retain the information. So I think there's two reasons for this. One, if you take notes during class and you write things down, it helps you to it helps it to sink into the brain. And the forming of the letters physically with the pen help it to sink into the brain better than typing it, actually. And then second, it helps you later on, weeks later for a test, months later for your way down the line for the AP exam. You're going to need those notes to kind of go back to it to refresh your memory. Okay? So this Cornell note-taking style, I'm going to take you through it and kind of just explain to you how it works. So how I want you guys to picture it, take a look at this part of the screen right here. Okay? This is really showing you how you should break up your page. So really think of this as, or this whole area here, as your notebook page. It should be broken up into 3 sections. So the biggest section is kind of on the right-hand side here, which takes up most of the page, which is they call your notes section. Then you should have a thinner column on the left-hand side called the cues section, and then at the bottom you have this section called the summary section. Okay, so if you're looking at your piece of paper, maybe you could do it now. You want to divide your page up into these 3 different sections, the notes being the biggest, and the cues and the summary are about, the same size. So I'm going to take you through what you should be writing and when you should be writing it in each of these different sections. And my explanation might be a little bit different than this diagram in certain respects, okay? All right, so first section, your biggest section is your notes section. So what should you write down in your notes section? First thing is, in my class in particular, this might not be true of every class, but in my class in particular, I always start the lesson with an aim up on the board and Roman numerals. Now, usually I have 3 Roman numerals up there. If you look back at the beginning of this lesson, I only have 1, because this is kind of just like a brief topic. We're just talking about a note-taking style. But usually I'd have Roman numeral 2 here and Roman numeral 3 here. Now, what does that mean for you taking notes? That means that I've already kind of set up for you. These are the three major topics we're going to talk about in this lesson today. So coming to class, what I would do is write the aim down in my notes section, and then I would write the three major points, but space them out across the entire page to give you space to write notes while you're going through the lesson. And you should have about equal information, in most of those three sections. So that's the first thing. I would use these Roman numerals as the guides. That's why I tell them to you up front, so you know, like, hey, this is what's coming up. These are the things we're going to talk about. These are the focuses. Underneath those Roman numerals, what you want to try and think about are bullet point key main ideas that we're talking about, sub things underneath those Roman numerals. So how do you know what those things are? One, this is where homework comes in big. If you do your homework and you do your reading, you kind of have an idea of what are the big topics that we should be focusing upon. Okay, so you want to write down bullet point key main ideas. What I would think about it as is think about like maybe the major topics of each slide of my PowerPoint. You should be writing something down for each slide of the PowerPoint. Okay, that will be my advice to you. If you can catch yourself too. If you notice during the lesson, like 3 slides of PowerPoints have gone by and you've written nothing down, that's a problem. Stay on top of it, right? It's very easy to sit in the class and to hear and to understand, follow the lesson, maybe even answer some questions, but let 10 minutes go by and not actually write anything down. So my advice to you is for every slide, try and write something down. There's a reason I make the slides. Whatever we talk about in class is what I'm telling you. Like, this is what I believe is the most important things from the textbook, the most important things from your reading. So for every PowerPoint slide, I would say a minimum you want to write a bullet point for every PowerPoint slide. Really emphasize things that I stress or I repeat. If I spend a lot of time on a PowerPoint slide, so sometimes I'll spend 5-10 minutes on one slide, that should, to you in your brain, that should trigger that, hey, this is important. I got to take some detailed notes about this. So if I'm repeating things or if I'm staying on a topic for a long time, that means I'm emphasizing it for a reason. Okay, and you want to pull out important people, important events that we talk about in class, that you want to make sure that you understand, right? Other thing that I think students really rarely write anything down about, I love to show diagrams, I love to show charts and maps up on the screen, political cartoons. I think rarely students note these things down in their notes, or pictures can help, maps can help. That's why I use them in class, and they can help you tremendously when you're going back to study. And you're not going to have my PowerPoint in front of you, right? So if you can quickly sketch, like a map or like an electoral map or whatever it is we're talking about, that might really help you out in understanding some of the information. My advice to you, you can take this one as you want, but I think more detail is better than less when you're taking notes, because as you go back, you're going to forget a lot of information. So you want to make sure that you have detailed notes so you can look back and it can help you to study. Okay, so that's like your notes section, which is, when are you writing this down? This is all during class. So all during class you're writing this down. Now, the other section, which is I think something that students pretty much never do unless they're told to do it. Now, you guys as AP students have to be active note takers, and this is the key to doing well in an AP class. Yes, you have to take this form of notes, right? This is mostly factual, things that we're talking about in class, people, places, events. This is what separates an AP student: analysis. Okay, so your Q section, in my opinion, is mostly for analysis of the notes, okay? And you're going to do this at 2 different times. One, during class, right? You can kind of try and do this analysis, but you can also try and do this after class a little bit when you're looking at your notes, maybe, that night or, another time. You can try and make these connections. Right, so this is key. What you want to do in this section, and you could carry this over into the notes section a little bit for more room, you want to connect the points we're making to each other and connect it back to the aim question, right? This is analysis. Like, you have to think, well, let's say the aim is something along the lines of, how big of a role did geography play in early British colonies, right, and we're talking about different regions of the British colonies throughout our lesson, you have to make those connections back to the AIM question, because that's really what we're driving at. AP classes are about analysis, okay? So what should you be thinking about, right? When you're taking notes, don't just write down the facts, the information. You have to think about, well, what's important about this person? Why is this significant? Why are we talking about this? Does this show change? Does this show continuity over time? You want to make notes to yourself. Like if you think this is a major change in, let's say, economic system or political system, you want to make a note to yourself about that. You also want to make a note to yourself about how does this relate to previous eras we've talked about, right? A big part of the AP test is showing connections over time, right? Can you connect it to previous time periods? So when our class, officially, I guess, begins tomorrow, we're going to be talking about time period 2, 1607 to 1763, which primarily focuses on British colonization. So one of the things I would be doing throughout that whole era is trying to connect it back to time period 1, right? Time period 1 focuses on Spanish colonization for the most part. Can you see differences? Can you compare British and Spanish colonization? Can you compare the different regions of the British colonies? Is this showing changes to European colonization? Those kinds of analysis questions you ask yourself, those are key. Okay, so you can take this style of notes as much as you can during class, but then after class a little bit as well. Another thing what I would write down, if you can, students very rarely write this down, but I think this is a very big deal as well. You can write down questions that I ask in class. I ask a lot of questions, and a lot of the questions I ask are deep analysis questions. They make you think, right? And there's a reason I'm asking you these questions, is because this is information I want you to be able to pull out and to remember about the history. So you can take the opportunity and write down some of my questions in your Q section, because it's going to help you to really do that analysis and to think. And I think often students don't even think to do that, to write down questions that the teacher is asking. And then the other thing you can do, I think this maybe will be after the lesson more, you can try and write down maybe like anticipated exam questions, questions you think that might come from these questions, potential short answers, potential essay questions. And this, I think, might come a little bit later in the class year or the year, school year, because you might not know that much about like the types of questions that might show up on your exam, in our first unit. All right, the last section is the briefest section, and this one is done solely after class. So like this, you should take like 5 minutes at the most. You can do it like in another period, a lunch period, after the day. Like if you have a few spare minutes, you can write it down. What I would do is, this is called the summary, and it's for you to kind of like summarize the lesson in 3 to 5 sentences about. And I think a good way to do this is to try and answer the AIM question in 3 to 5 sentences with some detailed evidence, right? You always want to have evidence as to why you believe what you believe. In our class, a lot of what you have to do is make arguments, right? AP classes are analysis driven and they're argument driven. And arguments and analysis only make sense if you have evidence to prove your positions and prove your points. And I think that's what I would try to add in my summary section. So this one is on your own. This one is an at-home kind of thing, on your own, after the lesson, after the class period, to try and summarize what we talked about during the day. All right, we're going to stop there. So I will see everybody tomorrow for our kind of like introduction to time period 2 and the beginning of British colonization in the New World.